The biggest fortunes are not always hidden inside banks. Sometimes they wait behind doors that everyone else has forgotten. On a cool Saturday morning, the parking lot outside the Jefferson County Fairgrounds buzzed with quiet conversations as farmers, collectors, contractors, and curious neighbors gathered for the county surplus auction. Old tractors, rusted trailers, abandoned storage units, and neglected commercial buildings waited for new owners willing to gamble on forgotten possibilities. Daniel Carter stood near the back of the crowd with his hands tucked inside the pockets of his faded denim jacket, trying to ignore the knot of worry tightening inside his chest. At 39 years old, he had learned that life rarely rewarded people who played it safe. Since losing his wife several years earlier, every decision he made revolved around one person. His 8-year-old son, Noah, stood beside him wearing a slightly oversized flannel shirt, holding a paper cup filled with hot chocolate that warmed his small hands against the crisp autumn air. Noah looked up at his father with quiet optimism that only children seemed able to carry through difficult seasons. "Do you think we will find something good today?" he asked with a hopeful smile. Daniel looked across the rows of forgotten properties listed in the auction booklet before answering honestly. "I do not know," he said gently, "but sometimes the best opportunities are the ones nobody else wants." Noah nodded, as though those words explained everything. Daniel smiled softly. His savings account contained exactly $2,134, the result of years spent repairing engines, rebuilding transmissions, and accepting every overtime job he could find. Nearly every dollar represented evenings sacrificed after Noah had gone to sleep and weekends spent underneath old pickup trucks instead of relaxing with friends. Buying another commercial garage was never part of his plan. He only wanted a place where he could work independently, build a better future, and perhaps one day leave something meaningful to his son besides unpaid bills. The auctioneer continued moving quickly through one property after another while bidders confidently raised their numbered paddles. Every building Daniel had quietly considered climbed far beyond his budget within seconds. He lowered his eyes, preparing himself for disappointment. Then the auctioneer paused before announcing the final commercial listing. "Property number 17, he called, an abandoned roadside garage outside Millstone, sold strictly as is. Several people laughed before anyone even placed a bid. Grainy photographs appeared on a large display showing broken windows, faded paint, a collapsing wooden sign, and weeds growing through cracked concrete. One contractor shook his head. "That place should be torn down," he muttered loudly enough for nearby bidders to hear. Another man chuckled. "It will cost more to clean than it is worth." Daniel quietly studied the photographs. Beneath years of neglect, he noticed sturdy brick walls, a wide service entrance, and enough space to rebuild a modest repair shop. It was not beautiful, but neither had his own life been when he chose to keep moving forward instead of giving up. "Opening bid," the auctioneer announced. $2,000. Silence settled across the crowd. Daniel slowly raised his paddle. The auctioneer glanced around the room. "Any higher?" No one answered. Going once. Still no bids. Going twice. Daniel felt Noah squeeze his sleeve. "Dad," the little boy whispered excitedly, "I think it is ours." The gavel struck the wooden podium with a sharp crack. Sold for $2,000. A wave of quiet laughter spread through the audience. One man leaned toward another and smiled. That poor mechanic just bought himself a pile of junk. Daniel ignored every word. He accepted the paperwork with calm gratitude, believing he had simply purchased an old garage and another chance to work honestly. But across the crowded auction hall, a woman wearing an elegant cream-colored coat suddenly froze in place. Victoria Hayes lowered the dark sunglasses that concealed her face and stared at the property number printed across the auction screen. Her breathing slowed. Her fingers tightened around the leather folder she had been carrying. For the first time in nearly 10 years of searching, someone else had just purchased the one abandoned garage she had never stopped trying to find. The following morning, the abandoned garage looked even older than it had in the auction photographs. Morning sunlight revealed faded white paint peeling away from weathered brick walls, broken window panes clouded by decades of dust, and stubborn weeds pushing through long cracks in the concrete driveway. Daniel Carter parked his aging pickup truck beside the building and stepped out with Noah carrying a small red toolbox, almost half his own size. The cool breeze carried the scent of damp earth and old pine trees growing behind the property, while somewhere nearby a wind chime echoed softly from a neighboring farmhouse. Daniel unlocked the heavy front door with a rusted key he had received only hours before. The hinges groaned loudly as the door slowly swung inward, releasing years of stale air mixed with the familiar smell of aged motor oil, dry wood, and forgotten machinery. Noah's eyes widened with excitement instead of disappointment. "It is bigger than I imagined," he whispered. Daniel smiled as sunlight poured through the open doorway, illuminating floating dust that shimmered like tiny stars. "It just needs someone willing to believe in it," he answered quietly. They spent the next several hours carrying broken shelves outside, sweeping thick layers of dust from the concrete floor and opening every window that still functioned. Daniel worked steadily without complaining, while Noah proudly sorted old bolts, rusty hand tools, and pieces of scrap metal into neat piles. Every few minutes, the little boy discovered something he believed might still be useful. Maybe this wrench still works. Maybe this old cabinet can be fixed. Daniel laughed softly each time before replying, "We will find out together." As the afternoon sun climbed higher, the old garage slowly began looking less abandoned and more like a place that had simply been waiting for someone to care again. Just after noon, the quiet sound of tires rolling over gravel interrupted their work. A dark luxury sport utility vehicle stopped near the entrance. Moments later, a woman wearing simple blue jeans, a light beige sweater, and comfortable walking shoes stepped out carrying no jewelry beyond a modest wristwatch. Without her business attire or executive presence, Victoria Hayes appeared to be nothing more than another curious visitor passing through the countryside. She walked toward the open garage with a calm smile. "Good afternoon," she said warmly. "I heard someone finally bought this old place." Daniel wiped his hands with a clean shop towel before greeting her. "That would be me." Victoria slowly looked around the garage, carefully studying every corner while hiding the emotion building inside her. "Would you ever consider selling it?" she asked casually. Daniel seemed surprised by the question. "I only bought it yesterday." She nodded politely. "I understand, but perhaps you made a good investment. I could offer you $20,000 today." Noah nearly dropped the box he was carrying. Daniel blinked in disbelief before quietly shaking his head. "That is generous," he replied, "but I did not buy it to make a quick profit." Victoria kept her expression composed, although disappointment flickered briefly across her eyes. $30,000. Daniel smiled respectfully. "I appreciate the offer. Truly. But my son and I finally have a place where we can build something together." Noah looked proudly toward his father without saying a word. Victoria noticed the little exchange and hesitated. For the first time in many years, she found herself speaking to someone whose decisions could not be influenced by money alone. She glanced toward the worn wooden walls as though searching for something invisible before making one final attempt. $50,000, she said softly. "Cash. We can complete everything today." The old garage became completely silent except for the distant singing of birds outside. Daniel rested one hand gently on Noah's shoulder before answering with calm certainty. "Some opportunities are worth more than the number written on a check." Victoria studied his face for several long seconds. There was no greed, no hesitation, no attempt to negotiate for more. Only quiet conviction. She offered a polite smile, thanked him for his time, and slowly walked back toward her vehicle. As she drove away, she glanced once more through the rearview mirror at the forgotten building growing smaller behind her. Then she reached into her handbag, removed a faded black and white photograph of an old roadside garage taken decades earlier, and placed it beside the steering wheel. The weathered roof, the brick walls, even the crooked wooden sign matched perfectly. After searching for almost 10 years, she had finally found the place she thought history had erased. The only problem was that it now belonged to a man whose character appeared far more difficult to purchase than the building itself. Over the next 3 days, The old garage slowly began shedding the appearance of a forgotten ruin. Fresh air flowed freely through windows that had been sealed shut for years. Broken shelves disappeared one load at a time, and the concrete floor gradually revealed its original gray surface beneath layers of dirt and dust. Every morning before school, Noah insisted on helping for an hour, proudly carrying buckets, organizing tools, and sweeping corners that seemed far too large for someone's age. Daniel never hurried him. Instead, he treated every small effort with the same respect he gave to rebuilding an engine. Good work is never measured by size, he would often say. It is measured by care. Noah smiled every time he heard those words. Late on the third afternoon, sunlight streamed through the western windows, filling the garage with warm golden light. Daniel had begun removing warped wooden panels from the back storage area where decades of moisture had damaged the walls. As he carefully pried away another loose board with a flat bar, the tool suddenly slipped deeper than expected. Instead of solid brick behind the panel, it struck an empty space with a dull, hollow echo. Daniel stopped immediately. He knocked gently against the remaining boards. Hollow. He tried another section only a few inches away. Solid. Noah looked up from sorting old hardware. Did you hear that? Daniel nodded slowly. There is something behind this wall. Together, they worked patiently, removing each board without damaging the surrounding structure. Dust floated through the quiet room, while the smell of old cedar filled the air. After nearly an hour of careful work, the hidden outline of a narrow wooden door slowly emerged from behind the false wall. Its edges had blended so perfectly into the original construction that it had remained invisible beneath the covering for decades. A heavy brass keyhole rested at the center, coated in layers of age-darkened dust. Noah stepped closer with wide eyes. Somebody wanted nobody to find this. Daniel ran his fingertips across the weathered wood. Or maybe they wanted the right person to find it. There was no key, no handle, only the silent door standing before them like a forgotten promise. They searched every nearby shelf, every cabinet, and every old toolbox, but nothing fit the unusual lock. Daniel finally stepped back. We will not force it, he said calmly. If it has stayed closed this long, another day will not matter. At that same moment, nearly 40 miles away, Victoria Hay sat alone inside her executive office overlooking the city skyline. The walls displayed framed photographs celebrating the success of Hay's Motors. Yet her attention remained fixed on an old leather journal lying open across her desk. Carefully preserved sketches filled its pages, along with faded notes written by her grandfather decades earlier. One sentence had been underlined in blue ink. The workshop must remain hidden until someone values character more than ownership. Victoria quietly closed the journal. She remembered Daniel's refusal to sell despite 3 increasingly generous offers. It was the first time in years anyone had looked beyond money while speaking to her. She reached for her telephone. I need every historical property survey connected to the Millstone Garage, she instructed her executive assistant. Especially anything completed before 1975. Less than an hour later, digital copies appeared on her computer screen. Most showed only the familiar roadside building, but one faded survey contained a hand-drawn notation beneath the foundation. Private workshop. Restricted access. Victorious. Heartbeat quickened. She enlarged the image several times, comparing measurements with memories she had carried since childhood. The dimensions matched perfectly. She leaned back slowly, realizing the impossible had become real. Daniel had not simply purchased an abandoned garage. Without knowing it, he had become the guardian of the one place her grandfather had protected more carefully than any factory, office, or fortune he ever built. Meanwhile, as evening settled across the countryside, Daniel locked the garage for the night and glanced one last time toward the hidden wooden door before driving home with Noah. Neither of them noticed that tucked behind an old metal cabinet resting only a few feet away, the corner of a small, weathered wooden box had begun to emerge after years buried beneath layers of dust, quietly waiting for someone patient enough to discover what it had protected all along. The next morning arrived wrapped in quiet gray clouds as Daniel unlocked the garage before sunrise, determined to continue restoring the building one careful step at a time. The hidden wooden door lingered in the back of his mind, but he refused to let curiosity distract him from honest work. Noah would be in school for the day, giving him uninterrupted hours to organize the remaining clutter. As he moved the heavy metal cabinet that had stood untouched against the rear wall for decades, something small slid across the dusty concrete floor with a gentle scrape. Daniel knelt down and discovered a weathered wooden box no larger than a shoebox, its surface covered with years of dust but remarkably well preserved. There was no lock, only a simple brass clasp darkened by age. He opened it carefully. Inside rested several neatly folded engineering sketches, a leather notebook with faded edges, and a solid brass key unlike any he had ever seen. The key was heavier than expected, polished smooth by long-ago hands, and engraved with two elegant letters, HM. Daniel turned it slowly beneath the morning light without understanding its meaning. Beneath the key lay a small handwritten note secured with twine. The paper had yellowed with time, but the ink remained surprisingly clear. It contained only one sentence. Character opens doors that money never will. Daniel quietly read the words twice before placing the note back into the box with great care. Something about the sentence reminded him of lessons his own father had repeated when he was growing up. He carefully rolled the engineering drawings across an old workbench. Instead of financial records or property documents, the pages revealed beautifully detailed mechanical designs unlike anything he had expected to find inside an abandoned garage. Every line had been drawn with remarkable precision. There were handwritten calculations, prototype measurements, and thoughtful notes explaining improvements rather than profits. Daniel smiled with genuine admiration. Whoever created these plans clearly loved building things simply because they could make people's lives better. Hundreds of miles of experience repairing engines allowed him to recognize the brilliance hidden inside the drawings, even though many concepts seemed decades ahead of their time. Meanwhile, inside the executive headquarters of Hayes Motors, Victoria Hayes sat with the company's oldest archivist reviewing boxes of family records rarely opened by anyone. Fragile photographs covered the conference table. Most showed factories, assembly lines, and company celebrations, but one black and white photograph immediately caught her attention. It showed her grandfather standing proudly inside a modest roadside garage beside a workbench covered with blueprints. Victoria quietly placed the newly discovered county survey beside the photograph. Every window aligned, every brick matched, every detail confirmed the same location. The elderly archivist adjusted his glasses before speaking softly. Your grandfather always believed his greatest invention was never an engine. Victoria looked up with curiosity. Then what was it? The old man smiled gently. A place where ordinary people could become extraordinary through honest work. Those words settled heavily in the room. Victoria suddenly realized why her grandfather had never transferred ownership of the building into the company's official records. It had never been intended as another corporate asset. It had been something far more personal. Back at the garage, Daniel picked up the brass key again and instinctively walked toward the hidden wooden door concealed behind the false wall. The engraved letters on the key matched the unusual shape of the old keyhole almost perfectly. He paused before inserting it, taking a slow breath as though sensing the importance of what might be waiting beyond the weathered wood. The garage remained completely silent except for the distant sound of wind moving through the tall pine trees outside. With calm hands and no expectation beyond simple curiosity, Daniel gently turned the brass key. After remaining sealed for longer than anyone could remember, the old lock responded with one quiet metallic click that echoed through the empty garage like history finally deciding it was time to be heard. The old wooden door opened only a few inches before resisting, its swollen hinges protesting after decades without movement. Daniel applied gentle pressure until the opening became wide enough for him to step through. Cool air drifted from the dark room beyond, carrying the scent of aged wood, machine oil, and dry paper that had somehow survived the passing years. Sunlight filtered through a narrow skylight hidden beneath the roof, illuminating thousands of tiny dust particles that floated silently through the stillness. It did not feel like entering an abandoned room. It felt like walking into a moment that time had carefully protected. Daniel stood quietly, allowing his eyes to adjust. Along one wall rested polished wooden cabinets, filled with precision measuring tools arranged in perfect order. A sturdy oak workbench occupied the center of the room, its surface remarkably clean beneath a thin layer of dust, as though its owner had intended to return the following morning. Shelves held carefully labeled metal boxes containing gears, bearings, and handcrafted components unlike anything Daniel had ever seen in an ordinary repair shop. Every object reflected patience, discipline, and extraordinary craftsmanship. Nothing had been left carelessly. Everything had a purpose. Daniel slowly approached the workbench, where a brass nameplate remained firmly attached to the front edge. He brushed away years of dust with the palm of his hand until the engraved words became visible. Hayden Mitchell, founder. Build with honesty before building for profit. Daniel quietly repeated the sentence under his breath. The words settled deeply inside him. He had never heard of Hayden Mitchell, yet the message sounded timeless. Nearby, another stack of engineering journals rested neatly beneath a leather strap. Daniel carefully opened the first notebook. Instead of financial reports or business strategies, each page described lessons learned from mistakes, observations about treating employees with respect, and sketches for mechanical improvements designed to make vehicles safer rather than cheaper. One handwritten paragraph caught his attention immediately. A successful company is measured by the number of families it helps stand with dignity, not by the number of dollars it collects. Daniel slowly closed the journal and smiled with quiet admiration. He understood engines better than corporate history, but he recognized wisdom whenever he encountered it. Outside, the familiar sound of tires rolling across gravel interrupted the silence. Daniel stepped back into the main garage just as a black luxury sedan came to a stop near the entrance. This time Victoria Hayes stepped out wearing a tailored Navy business suit, accompanied by an older attorney carrying a slim leather briefcase. There was no attempt to disguise who she was. Her calm expression carried both confidence and respect. Daniel greeted her with the same quiet courtesy he had shown before. Victoria looked toward the hidden doorway, now standing slightly open behind him. She noticed the faint traces of dust on his shirt and immediately understood what had happened. "You found it," she said softly. Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he simply nodded once. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The old garage seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Victoria took one careful step forward. "My name is Victoria Hayes," she said. "I am the chief executive officer of Hayes Motors." Daniel offered a polite handshake without any sign of surprise or excitement. "It is nice to meet you." The absence of admiration caught Victoria off guard. She had become accustomed to people reacting differently after learning who she was. Daniel only saw another person standing inside his garage. The attorney quietly opened the briefcase and placed several documents on a nearby workbench. Victoria looked directly at Daniel before speaking again. "I would like to make a formal offer. $5 million for this property. You keep every personal belonging you have already discovered. The building alone is what I hope to purchase." The number echoed through the quiet garage, yet Daniel's expression remained unchanged. He glanced toward the hidden workshop before returning his eyes to Victoria. "May I ask one question?" he said calmly. She nodded. "If this place is worth $5 million to you today, why was it allowed to sit abandoned for so many years?" Victoria lowered her eyes for the first time since arriving. She searched for an answer that money could not provide and discovered that none came easily. Victoria remained silent for several long moments, her eyes fixed on the worn wooden floor instead of the legal documents resting on the workbench. The confident executive who negotiated billion-dollar contracts without hesitation suddenly looked like a granddaughter carrying the weight of an unfinished promise. Finally, she took a slow breath and answered with complete honesty. Because I spent almost 10 years searching for the wrong place. Daniel listened quietly without interrupting. My grandfather never told anyone where he built his first workshop, Victoria continued. After he passed away, everyone assumed it had been demolished during the expansion of our company. We searched old factories, warehouses, and storage buildings across 3 states. We never imagined it was still standing here, hidden behind an ordinary roadside garage. Daniel glanced toward the concealed doorway. Then why offer to buy it instead of simply asking to see it? Victoria looked at him with a faint smile that carried more regret than pride. Because that is how I have solved problems for most of my life. I thought money would always be the fastest answer. The words lingered in the quiet air. Daniel nodded thoughtfully before speaking. Sometimes it is. He smiled gently. Sometimes it is not. Neither statement sounded like criticism. They simply reflected experience. At that moment, Noah rushed into the garage after school, carrying his backpack over one shoulder. Dad, I finished my science project. He called happily before noticing the visitors. He stopped politely and offered a friendly smile. Hello. Victoria smiled back with unexpected warmth. Hello, Noah. The little boy walked beside his father and immediately noticed the papers spread across the workbench. Are you buying our garage? He asked innocently. Victoria hesitated before answering. I was hoping to. Noah looked toward Daniel. But we are fixing it together. Daniel rested his hand gently on his son's shoulder. That is right. Noah nodded once, completely satisfied, then wandered toward the back room to continue organizing the old shelves he had proudly claimed as his own project. Victoria quietly watched the father and son without saying a word. She suddenly understood that what stood before her was not merely a property. It had already become a home for hope. Daniel disappeared briefly into the hidden workshop before returning with the leather notebook and placing it carefully on the workbench between them. I found this today, he said. Victoria slowly opened the cover. Her eyes immediately filled with emotion as she recognized her grandfather's familiar handwriting. She gently traced the ink with her fingertips, almost afraid the pages might disappear. Tucked inside the notebook rested a faded family photograph showing a younger Hayden Mitchell standing beside a smiling little girl holding a tiny toy wrench. Victoria smiled through quiet emotion. That was my mother, she whispered. Daniel respectfully stepped back, allowing the moment to belong entirely to her. After several minutes, Victoria carefully closed the journal and returned it. Thank you for letting me see this. Daniel looked surprised. It belongs to your family. Victoria slowly shook her head. No, her voice was calm but certain. It belongs to the person who found it honestly. The attorney looked confused but remained silent. Victoria reached into her briefcase, removed the purchase agreement, and quietly folded it in half before placing it back inside. I'm withdrawing my offer. Daniel blinked with surprise. You searched for this place for 10 years. Victoria smiled gently. Yes. She glanced toward the hidden workshop one more time. And perhaps my grandfather spent those same 10 years waiting for someone exactly like you to open that door. As she turned to leave, a small folded envelope slipped unnoticed from between the pages of the leather notebook onto the wooden floor beneath the workbench, its faded wax seal still perfectly intact after all those years, quietly waiting for the next chapter to reveal the truth it had protected for generations. The envelope rested unnoticed beneath the edge of the old workbench until late that evening, after Noah had finished his homework inside the small office Daniel had begun cleaning for future use. The quiet garage echoed with the steady ticking of an old wall clock that somehow still kept perfect time. Daniel swept the remaining dust from the workshop floor when the broom gently nudged something against his boot. He bent down and picked up the cream-colored envelope, its wax seal still unbroken despite the passing decades. There was no name written on the front, only 2 carefully printed words. For the finder. Daniel paused for a moment before carrying the envelope into the hidden workshop. He sat at the sturdy oak workbench where Hayden Mitchell had once spent countless hours building ideas instead of fortunes. With careful hands, he broke the brittle wax seal, and unfolded several handwritten pages. The elegant handwriting matched the journals he had already discovered. The first sentence immediately captured his attention. If you're reading this letter, then you have already proven something more valuable than skill. You have proven patience. Daniel continued, reading slowly. Hayden explained that the workshop had never been hidden to protect inventions from competitors. It had been hidden to protect principles from people who believed success could always be purchased. He wrote about the importance of treating every customer with honesty, every employee with respect, and every opportunity as a responsibility rather than a reward. Near the end of the letter, another sentence stood alone on the page. The building belongs to whoever chooses service before ownership. Daniel quietly lowered the paper. The room suddenly felt even more peaceful than before. He understood that the greatest treasure inside the garage had never been machinery or blueprints. It was the character of the man who had built them. The following morning, Victoria arrived once again, this time without lawyers, assistants, or expensive vehicles. She drove an ordinary pickup truck borrowed from one of the company's testing facilities and carried only a small notebook beneath her arm. Daniel welcomed her inside with the same quiet smile. "I found something," he said. He handed her the letter without another word. Victoria read every page carefully, her eyes slowing whenever she recognized her grandfather's familiar wisdom. By the time she reached the final sentence, she gently closed her eyes for a brief moment. "He never wanted this place returned to our family," she whispered. "He wanted it entrusted to the right family." Daniel shook his head gently. "I do not think he was talking about me." Victoria smiled softly. "I think he was." Before either of them could continue, the sound of several vehicles pulling onto the gravel driveway interrupted the peaceful morning. 3 dark sport utility vehicles stopped outside the garage. Moments later, several professionally dressed representatives stepped out carrying presentation folders and rolled architectural plans. The man leading the group introduced himself politely. "Good morning. My name is Richard Collins. I represent Horizon Community Development." He unfolded a large site map across the hood of his vehicle. "Our company recently finalized plans for a new commercial retail center covering this entire section of Millstone. We have already secured agreements from every neighboring property owner." He pointed directly toward Daniel's garage. "Yours is the only remaining parcel." Daniel listened respectfully. Richard smiled with practiced confidence. "We are prepared to offer significantly above market value. You would never need to work another day if you accepted." Daniel remained quiet. Victoria studied the plans and immediately recognized the scale of the proposed project. The old garage would disappear beneath parking lots and storefronts within weeks. Richard waited patiently before adding one final sentence. "We believe everyone has a price." The morning breeze drifted gently through the open garage, carrying the scent of fresh pine and old cedar from the hidden workshop. Daniel glanced toward the doorway, where Hayden Mitchell's words still rested upon the workbench, before looking back at the developers with calm eyes. Victoria watched silently beside him, suddenly realizing that the next decision would reveal whether the principles preserved inside those walls still had the power to change lives in the present, just as they had decades before. Richard Collins waited with the confidence of someone who had rarely heard the word no. The architect standing beside him quietly unrolled larger blueprints showing wide streets, modern storefronts, landscape sidewalks, and a large parking area that covered nearly every acre surrounding the old garage. It was an impressive vision of progress, carefully designed and professionally presented. Daniel studied the drawings without rushing. When he finished, he gently folded his hands together and looked at Richard. "It is a beautiful project," he said sincerely. "I hope it helps this town." Richard smiled, believing the conversation was moving in the right direction. "Then we have an agreement?" Daniel slowly shook his head. "No, I cannot sell." The smile faded from Richard's face. "May I ask why?" Daniel glanced toward the hidden workshop before answering. "Because some places earn the right to become more than real estate." Silence settled across the gravel driveway. Richard remained courteous, but his expression revealed disappointment. We are prepared to increase our offer substantially. Daniel answered with the same calm voice. The amount will not change my decision. Victoria watched quietly from only a few feet away. Just days earlier, she had stood in almost the exact same place, making her own offer. Now, she finally understood why Daniel had never negotiated. His answer had never depended on the number. Richard respectfully gathered his documents before offering one final handshake. If you ever reconsider, my number will remain the same. Daniel accepted the handshake warmly. Thank you for understanding. After the development team drove away, the sound of their vehicles gradually disappeared beyond the rolling hills, leaving only birdsong and the soft rustling of pine branches above the garage. Victoria looked toward Daniel with thoughtful admiration. Most people would have accepted that offer without hesitation. Daniel smiled gently. Perhaps. He looked across the weathered building where Noah was carefully repainting an old wooden shelf with patient concentration. But I've been thinking about your grandfather's letter. Victoria nodded. So have I. They walked together into the hidden workshop where Hayden Mitchell's journals remained neatly arranged across the workbench. Victoria opened one notebook to a page she had marked earlier that morning. She quietly read a single sentence aloud. A workshop should not only repair machines. It should restore confidence in people. The words lingered in the peaceful room. Noah looked up from the corner where he had been polishing old hand tools. What does that mean? He asked. Daniel smiled at his son before answering. Sometimes people need someone to believe in them before they can believe in themselves. Noah thought about those words carefully before nodding. Like when you taught me how to fix my bicycle. Daniel laughed softly. Exactly like that. Victoria slowly closed the journal. My grandfather never wanted this place to become a museum, she said. He wanted it to remain alive. Daniel looked around the workshop. Then maybe we should keep teaching here. The idea seemed almost too simple, yet neither of them could find a reason it would not work. They began talking quietly, one idea leading naturally to another. Free classes for young people interested in automotive repair, evening workshops for veterans beginning new careers, practical training for single parents trying to rebuild their lives, retired mechanics volunteering beside experienced engineers, a place where skill, dignity, and opportunity could exist together under one roof. The more they spoke, the more the forgotten garage seemed to reveal its true purpose. It had never been waiting for one owner. It had been waiting for one mission. Victoria looked toward Daniel with renewed determination. Hayes Motors has resources that can help without taking ownership. Daniel smiled. And this garage has a history worth sharing without selling. As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the hidden skylight, it illuminated Hayden Mitchell's brass nameplate resting quietly on the old workbench. Neither Daniel nor Victoria noticed that the warm light also revealed another line of engraved words beneath years of remaining dust, words that had stayed hidden until that very moment. Together we build what no one can own alone. 6 months later, the old roadside garage no longer looked like a forgotten building waiting for demolition. Fresh white paint reflected the morning sunlight across restored brick walls. New windows welcomed the light that had been missing for decades, and the weathered wooden sign had been carefully repaired instead of replaced. Beneath it, a simple bronze plaque carried Hayden Mitchell's words for every visitor to read. Build with honesty before building for profit. Inside, the familiar scent of old motor oil had blended with fresh-cut lumber, clean steel, and newly brewed coffee shared by volunteers who arrived before sunrise. Workbenches that had once stood empty were now surrounded by young apprentices learning how to rebuild engines, retired mechanics patiently explaining forgotten techniques, veterans beginning new careers, and single parents discovering practical skills that offered hope instead of uncertainty. Every lesson carried the same quiet message. Character always came before talent. Daniel Carter never called himself the director of the workshop. Most mornings he arrived before everyone else, unlocked the front door, swept the floor, and prepared the tools exactly as he had done when the building still belonged only to him and Noah. He believed leadership was demonstrated through service, not titles. Noah had grown comfortable welcoming every new student with a smile and proudly showing them the hidden workshop where Hayden Mitchell's journals remained safely displayed behind protective glass. They were not treated as priceless museum pieces. They were reminders that wisdom became valuable only when someone chose to live it. Victoria Hayes kept her promise as well. Hayes Motors quietly provided equipment, safety supplies, scholarships, and volunteer engineers without placing the company logo across every wall. She insisted the building should never become a corporate advertisement. It belonged to the community exactly as her grandfather had intended. On the morning of the official dedication ceremony, neighbors filled the parking lot long before the ribbon was ready to be cut. Families stood beside local business owners. Former students returned to thank their instructors, and county officials gathered with quiet admiration. Even Richard Collins attended after hearing how the abandoned garage had transformed into something no development project could have created. He walked through the restored workshop slowly, observing young people repairing engines beside experienced mentors, listening to laughter echo through rooms that had once been silent. When he found Daniel greeting guests near the entrance, Richard extended his hand with genuine respect. "I thought this land would create value as a shopping center," he admitted. "I was wrong." Daniel smiled warmly as they shook hands. There are many ways to build a community. Richard looked around once more before quietly adding, "This one will last longer." Moments later, Victoria stepped onto the small wooden platform prepared for the ceremony. The crowd gradually became silent. She looked across the gathering before speaking in a calm voice. Many people believe this story began when someone purchased an abandoned garage for $2,000. She paused gently. It did not. It began when one father refused to measure everything by money. Her eyes turned toward Daniel, who stood near the back beside Noah instead of standing on the stage. "My grandfather believed that the greatest legacy anyone could leave behind was not a company or a fortune. It was the courage to place dignity before profit." Daniel Carter reminded all of us what those words truly mean. No applause interrupted the moment. Instead, a quiet stillness settled across the entire crowd as people slowly turned toward the humble mechanic who had never asked for recognition. Daniel simply placed one hand on Noah's shoulder and offered a grateful smile. In that peaceful silence, the restored garage revealed its greatest purpose. It had never shocked a billionaire because it contained hidden wealth. It had changed her because it revealed a man whose quiet integrity was worth more than anything money could ever purchase. And in the end, that became the legacy they would all share together.